Alright, so we got a quick story for you all today. We're talking about Russia's, I guess, collaboration with Cuba. Putin invokes Castro's legacy. Former Indian diplomat M.K. Bahadrakramar. Bad pronunciation, okay? I'm American. Please understand. Reflects on Cuban President Diaz-Canel's visit to Russia and Vladimir Putin invocation of the legacy of Fidel Castro. We're going to check out that article. The link is in the bio of People's Dispatch. So, see if we can find that article. Probably should have done this before. I'll pause it. Just a quick disclaimer before we get into this article. I do not support Putin, and I do not support Russia, nor do I support Russia's war in Ukraine. But I am also not on the side of Ukraine, or, well, not to the point where we should be basically fighting war for them. And their government's corrupt, and the neo-Nazis and their National Guard, and that Volodymyr Lizinski, yeah, I think that's his name, um, that he was basically propped up by the United States through a coup that the United States did. So let's read this. The inauguration of the statue of Fidel Castro takes place during the 60th anniversary year of the Cuban Missile Crisis. The discord then was eerily similar to the one now over U.S. attempts to push strategic deployments in Russia's immediate neighborhood. Once again, I don't know about that. I'm not really on the side of Russia. But I will agree that the United States NATO expansion has kind of put Russia in a awkward position because they fear that they're going to be next to be taken over by the United States, or at least invaded. A 3-meter tall bronze statue of Fidel Castro was unveiled on Tuesday in the Fidel Castro Square in Moscow's Sokol district by Russian President Vladimir Putin and Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Canel in memory of the historic leader of the Cuban Revolution. Fidel himself was staunchly against creating a cult of personality, and in Cuba there are no streets, buildings, institutions, or localities named for him. In a speech in 2003, Fidel stated there is no cult of personality around any living revolutionary in the form of statues, official photographs, or the names of streets or institutions. The leaders of this country are human beings, not gods. Thus, the only things named in honor of the great revolutionary are located outside Cuba, apart in Vietnam, several streets in South Africa, Namibia, Angola, Tanzania, Mozambique, and so on. The event in Moscow saluting Fidel's legacy is highly symbolic. From being a status quo state, Russia is rapidly assuming a revolutionary role in world politics, challenging the so-called rules-based order imposed by the West, and is in the middle of one of the gravest crises of the post-Cold War era. I want to say something about that. I don't know anything about Russia being in a revolutionary place, invading Ukraine. Kind of seems like an imperialist move. Once again, I'm not taking United States or NATO side in this war, but I don't think Russia is entirely innocent either. So, well, they're clearly not. They invaded Ukraine, and there's not much way to get around that. And I view the Russian government as fascist. but I don't know too much, considering the fact that most of what I've got about Russia has been from the mainstream Western media, so I can't 100% just say I know something about Russia. Also I need to zoom in a bit. It's probably not in the video very good. The year 2020 happens to be the 60th anniversary of the Cuban missile crisis, marking the high noon of the Cold War when again Moscow found itself at the center of a showdown with Washington. The discord then was eerily similar to the one now over the U.S. attempts to push strategic deployment in Russia's immediate neighborhood, threatening its natural defense and security. The crisis in 1962 erupted when the U.S. detected the construction of Soviet-launched sites in Cuba as retaliation for the U.S. deployment of Jupiter missiles in Turkey. Another thing I want to say about this is what I was thinking about. Soviet Union. United States is what overthrew the Soviet Union, which led to the rise of Vladimir Putin. So I would not be so quick to call Vladimir Putin a socialist or anything like that, because from what I've seen, he's a capitalist, state capitalist, or fascist. But I wouldn't be so quick to praise him. I feel like he's maybe virtue signaling to the left with this move. But once again, I don't know entirely. It was addressed through back-channel negotiations to reach a deal whereby the Soviet missiles were eventually dismantled and removed from Cuba, while on its part, the U.S. ended its quarantine of Cuba in October 1962 and removed its Jupiter missiles from Turkey by April 1963. Alas, President Biden, unlike President Kennedy, has refused to negotiate with Russia, and a proxy war ensued in Ukraine. The war could have been avoided and Ukraine's destruction averted if only negotiations were held to resuscitate the Minsk agreements that made allowance for some form of regional autonomy for Donbass region within a federated country governed from Kyiv. So yeah, once again, my position on the war in Ukraine. There should be peace. We should be striving for peace. We should be negotiating. First of all, I don't think the United States should have been involved in the first place. But if we're going to be involved, we should be getting Ukraine and Russia down at the table to talk about peace. But the former, what are they called in the UK? The Boris Johnson guy. He's the reason that the peace talks were thrown out from the very beginning. President Biden chose not to take that road, and of course, the pro-Western Ukrainian leadership in Kyiv felt encouraged to undermine the Minsk agreements as such. Thing about this, another point I want to make, the United States, one of the main reasons they're so interested in this war is because Volodymyr Zelensky is their basically puppet president, or Ukraine is basically a puppet government for the United States, because 2014, I believe it was, is the year that they had a coup in Ukraine and put far-right leader Volodymyr Zelensky in power. So let's continue. Putin recalled poignantly on Tuesday that in his last conversation with Fidel in July 2015, once again not taking Vladimir Putin's side. I don't know about this article. I don't know what side they're on. I feel like they are not exactly on Vladimir Putin's side, but they're definitely not on Ukraine and NATO's side. He talked about the things that were surprisingly consonant with the time of the development of a multipolar world, saying that independence and dignity cannot be put up for sale and that every nation is entitled to develop as it seems fit and to choose its own path. That a truly fair world has no place for dictatorship, plunder, or neocolonialism. Totally agree. That's what the United States is doing, and the United Kingdom to some extent, though the United States is the strongest with their imperialism. But I really wouldn't say Vladimir Putin is innocent of imperialism. Putin later drew the attention of Diaz-Canel to the demeanor of the statute. I do not know if you liked it or not, but it seems to me that one can't help but like it. Alright, where was I? I should have probably found that before I unpaused. Putin said with a smile, adding that it was an appropriate tribute to Fidel's memory and the real work of art. It's dynamic on the move looking forward, a perfect image of a true fighter. Diaz-Canel concurred. This is a monument in motion. I think it reflects Fidel's personality in the midst of struggle, just like we are in the midst of struggle today. The meaningful exchange carried a far-reaching message of its own. Truly, the Ukraine war has been a moment of truth for Russia. I don't know where they're going with this. From a foreign policy focused narrowly on national interests, the way you word that sounds like they're basically nationalists. Russia is reclaiming its regional and global role lately. Don't know what it means by that. I understand if they're saying they're trying to take back Ukraine, which they believe is theirs. My understanding of history, I know a few of the, just very few parts of the true history of all these wars and stuff. Most of it was from American propaganda, so I don't know a lot of it. Fidel would have nodded approvingly as Cuba under him had an internationalist outlook and made immense sacrifices in challenging U.S. hegemony. Fidel's legacy is of exceptional importance to Russia today. Putin described the friendship between Russia and Cuba as their shared heritage. He underscored, jointly, we will continue to strengthen our union and defend the great values of freedom, equality, and justice. Yeah, Putin said that. I don't think Russia is that free. Once again, I am not taking the side of Russia because, from what I understand, Russia is not a free country. Putin added, based on this solid foundation of friendship, we must, of course, bearing in mind the current realities, move on and strengthen our cooperation. I am very glad that we have such an opportunity. Diaz-Canel was more direct and forthright. He told Putin, we appreciate all the work that the Russian Federation is doing to ensure that the world moves toward multipolarity and makes progress in that direction. In this sense, we have serious leadership. Russia and Cuba have been subjected to unfair unilateral sanctions and have a common enemy, a common source, which is the Yankee Empire. I will say that the unilateral sanctions on Russia and Cuba have only harmed the working classes in Russia and Cuba, and the United States is, it's the United States, which manipulates a large part of humankind. And our first commitment is to continue to uphold the Russian Federation's position in this conflict, which we believe has its origins, unfortunately, in the fact that the United States is manipulating the international community. I don't disagree with that. We appreciate all efforts of the Russian Federation and your role in orientating the world towards multipolarity and encouraging it to move in this direction. In this sense, you have a very strong leadership role. How this verb in the Russian-Cuban relations pans out in the complex geopolitical setting will bear watch. The Russian-Cuban Intergovernmental Commission held a session in Moscow during Diaz-Canal's visit, where reportedly a number of important decisions on key issues were taken to advance the bilateral relations. And another thing about this, we did a story yesterday talking about how China and Cuba are talking about joining forces just in case the United States were to invade Taiwan. Now, I'm not entirely sure the history about Taiwan and what the people there, whether they want to be an independent country or a part of China. I don't know about that, so I choose to stay agnostic on that, but the United States has no business trying to start war with China. All they're doing is warmongering with Taiwan. That's what Nancy Pelosi did when she went to Taiwan. Literally just trying to start war just so they can help the military industrial complex, the weapons industry, etc. But let's continue. Where was I? No, I read that part. Diaz-Canal told Putin, we have identical approaches and views on global issues. I would like to say again that Russia can always rely on Cuba. No matter the denouement to the Ukraine war, Russia still would face the stark reality of the U.S. NATO military presence right at its doorstep. There is no question of a NATO rollback to the 1998 position in Europe. The Western mercenaries in their thousands are fighting in Ukraine, and prominent faces like General David Petraeus are demanding an open Western military intervention in Ukraine to defeat Russia. Instead, the U.S. initiative to induct Finland into NATO as a member, although that country faces no threat from Russia, aims to box in Russia, and the West is aggressively stepping up its presence all around Russia. It's inconceivable that Russia can afford to remain passive. And one thing I want to point out, one of the biggest reasons the United States is targeting Russia and China mostly is because they're trying to be the most powerful. But again, the only thing the United States is worried about is military power, because we rank all the worst and in a host sort of things, all the bad stuff. So suffice to say, Putin is playing the Cuban card at an inflection point. Interestingly, Diaz-Canal's itinerary of visit also includes China. Diaz-Canal will be the first head of state from a Latin American country that Xi Jinping receives after the 20th National Congress of the Communist Party of China. The Chinese Foreign Ministry took note that despite international vicissitudes, China and Cuba have forged ahead together on the path of building socialism with national characteristics, support each other on issues concerning core interests, and had close coordination on international and regional issues, setting an exemplary model for solidarity and cooperation between socialist countries and sincere mutual assistance between developing countries. In a commentary on Diaz-Canal's forthcoming visit, Global Times took note that despite U.S. long-term crackdown on left-wing governments in the region, Latin America is now experiencing pink tide resurgence, with major countries in the region turning left. Latin America is tired of U.S. hegemony and coercion, and leaders with the agenda focused on domestic development are gaining public support. M.K. Badakamur is a former diplomat. He was India's ambassador to Uzbekistan, and Turkey. The views are personal. Alright, so that concludes that article. That is from People's Dispatch. And that concludes this video. Thank you for watching. Hope you all enjoyed. Make sure you hit that like button, all of that. And we'll see you in the next one. This has been the Socialist Report, where we give you a socialist perspective on the stories and even the ones that the corporate media does not cover. So, peace.